let's think about some paradigm sorts of questions when it comes to choir auditions. Now, my purpose this morning is twofold. One is simply practical. As a matter of efficiency and good use of our time, let's think about auditions and what we do and the various practices and assumptions associated with them. Secondly, however, there's a bit of a gadfly purpose here. Once we begin to peek under the cover of what choir auditions are supposed to be, and how we actually do them, all sorts of interesting and sometimes provocative questions start to make themselves apparent. So I want you to be thinking about those things as well. Okay. Thank you. I want to point to, in terms of validity, at least face validity, I've already suggested that one of the things we sometimes do is have exclusively solo auditions for a choral singing decision. That isn't really very valid, is it? So we're not saying necessarily that the whole thing has to be a choral audition, but if you don't have some sort of group singing, some sort of choral singing as part of your audition process, then the credibility of our profession tends to suffer. I think we got into the business of thinking we could do it exclusively by hearing solo voices because of a fallacious assumption. Canons of logic call this a fallacy of composition. We assume that each of the parts contribute just as much to the whole. In other words, that the whole is the sum of its constituent parts. For example, every part of this machine is light. Therefore, this must be a very light machine. True or false? Not necessarily true, right? We could have umpteen million parts and it could be a very heavy machine, but each of the parts could be light. Or, every tenor in this choir has a wonderful voice, therefore I have a wonderful tenor section. Well, no, not necessarily. Could be true, perhaps, but not necessarily. And so we got into this thing. Howard Swan, back in that very influential book, A Choral Conducting a Symposium, proposed that the sound of a choir depended upon the sound of individual voices, and that you chose voices or trained individual voices on the basis of how they made that particular sound, and that's what contributed to the choral sound. Is that making sense? Fallacy of composition.